The morning began like any other. The house was still half asleep, wrapped in the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of a wall clock. A pale sunlight slipped through the curtains, turning the kitchen floor gold. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, rich and warm, mixing with the faint sound of birds outside the window. He stood by the counter, stirring his cup, watching the small ripples fade. Her suitcase sat near the door, half open, with a few clothes still waiting to be packed. His girlfriend, Mia, moved around the living room, humming softly while checking her travel list. She was leaving for a short business trip 3 days, maybe 4. He had agreed to stay behind for a few days to help her mother, Laura, with some things around the house. "Don't forget to water Mom's plants," Mia said, smiling as she zipped her bag. He nodded. "I'll take care of them. Don't worry." Laura, her mother, came in then, hair slightly messy, wearing a cozy robe, her voice still heavy with morning warmth. "You two up already?" she said, yawning softly. Mia laughed. "We've been up for hours." "You're lucky, Mom. You get to rest while I'm stuck in meetings." Laura smiled and poured herself some coffee, the sound soft and steady. "You know it's not rest when half the house chores are waiting," she said. "I'll make sure he earns his breakfast while you're gone." The three shared an easy laugh. The mood was light, filled with warmth and the comfort of family. But underneath it, there was something quieter, kind of stillness that lingered between words. When Mia finally left, the house grew strangely calm. Her car rolled down the driveway, the sound of tires fading into distance. He stood at the door for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching until the road was empty. Behind him, the clock ticked louder now, echoing in the still air. Laura broke the silence. "Well," she said gently, "it's just us now." He turned with a small smile. "Yeah, guess I'll start earning that breakfast." The day moved slowly. He fixed a shelf, trimmed the garden bushes, and helped replace a light bulb in the hallway. Laura stayed nearby, sometimes helping, sometimes just talking. Her voice had that calm tone, steady, kind, with a touch of playfulness that made everything feel easy. She told stories about Mia's childhood, about how clumsy she was with paint, or how she once broke a kitchen window chasing a butterfly. He laughed, imagining it all. "She still runs into things," he said. Laura smiled, shaking her head. "Some things never change." As afternoon came, light poured through the big windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt more alive now, filled with the sound of two people moving in quiet rhythm. She made sandwiches, he brewed fresh tea. They sat together at the table, the old wooden surface creaking softly beneath their arms. For a while, they said nothing. Just the sound of wind brushing against the window and the soft clink of spoons. There was peace in that silence, a rare kind of comfort that comes when no one needs to fill the air with words. "You know," Laura said at last, "it's nice having someone around again. The house feels less, empty." He looked up. "I can imagine. Must get quiet sometimes." "It does," she said softly. After Mia's father passed, it took a while to get used to quiet nights. Even after all these years, it still surprises me. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his tone gentle. She smiled faintly. "Don't be. Life moves on. We just find new ways to fill the silence." The light outside was dimming when they cleaned up together. She washed the dishes, he dried them. Every small movement felt slower, calmer. When their hands brushed accidentally while passing a plate, neither spoke, but both noticed. It was nothing, and yet something like a pause that lasted a heartbeat too long by evening. The house settled into its night sounds, the creak of wood, the soft hum of the heater, the faint sound of TV from the living room. Laura sat on the couch, a blanket over her legs, watching an old show. He joined her with 2 cups of tea, "Thanks," she said, taking one. Their fingers touched again, and this time stayed a little longer than before. They both laughed it off quickly, pretending it was nothing. The show played in the background, voices and laughter filling the room, but neither really watched. The air felt different, warmer, heavier, full of something unnamed. She looked at him once, then turned away, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the TV. He caught the small smile that played at her lips before she hid it behind the rim of her cup. The night grew late. The clock struck 10. "Well," Laura said softly, "I think I should head to bed. You should too." He nodded, standing up. "Yeah. Long day tomorrow." She paused at the hallway, turning slightly. The dim light fell across her face, softening every line. "Good night," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Good night," he replied. The hallway light clicked off. The hum of the house returned. Somewhere outside, the wind brushed against the trees. He stood there for a moment longer, staring into the quiet space she had just left. The warmth of her presence lingered in the air like the last note of a song, fading but impossible to forget. The next morning began quietly again, but something had changed in the air. The same sunlight slipped through the curtains. The same gentle hum filled the kitchen, but now it felt different, like a song he'd heard before. Played slower this time, he woke to the smell of breakfast, fresh toast and brewed coffee. Laura was already in the kitchen, wearing a light sweater, her hair tied up loosely. She looked peaceful, almost glowing in the warm light. "Good morning," he said. Stepping in with a sleepy smile, she turned, smiling back. "Morning. I made coffee. You take it black, right?" He nodded. "You remembered." She laughed softly. "I try." The simple exchange lingered in the air longer than it should have. He sat down, and she placed the cup in front of him. Their eyes met for a second, just a second, but it stayed with him far longer than it should. There was nothing spoken, no hint of what was quietly building. But both of them felt it. They ate breakfast like friends, like family, like two people pretending they didn't notice something new moving between them. Afterward, she asked for help bringing down some old boxes from the attic. It was dusty, filled with old photo frames, books, and half-forgotten memories. Sunlight filtered through the small window, catching the dust floating in the air like gold flecks. She opened one of the boxes and laughed softly. "Oh, look at this," she said, holding up a framed picture of Mia as a child. Missing 2 front teeth, holding a puppy. He smiled. "That's adorable. She was always messy," Laura said. "That dog destroyed half my garden, but Mia loved him more than anything." He looked at Harriet, the softness in her smile, the way her eyes glimmered with old memories. "You're proud of her," he said quietly. "I am," she replied, then sighed. "But sometimes I miss when it was just us. When she still needed me." There was a silence after that, a gentle kind. He didn't speak. She placed the frame down carefully, her fingers brushing a thin layer of dust away. When their hands reached for the same box, they touched again. This time, neither of them pulled away right away. It was a soft, hesitant contact, like a question neither dared to ask. Her skin was warm, trembling slightly. He cleared his throat and looked away first. "These are heavier than they look," he said quickly. She smiled, a little too quickly. "I told you I needed help." They both laughed, but the sound came out uneven, caught between comfort and something else entirely. When they came back downstairs, the house felt smaller, closer. He helped her set the boxes near the living room. One slipped slightly, and he caught it before it hit the ground, his hand brushing her arm as he steadied it. The brief touch sent a jolt through both of them. "Careful," she said, her voice softer now. "Sorry," he murmured. There was that silence again, the kind that said too much. She stepped back, pretending to straighten a photo frame on the wall, and he pretended to check the box label. But their minds were no longer on the boxes as the day went on. They avoided direct eye contact, but their glances still found each other through corners, reflections, and passing moments. He caught her watching him once while he cleaned the patio window. She looked away quickly, not before he saw that same flicker in her eyes, warmth she didn't mean to show. By afternoon, they sat outside under the shade of the old tree. The air was cool, and the sky was soft gray, hinting at rain. She had brought out lemonade and 2 glasses. He asked, "Do you ever travel much?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. I used to, when Mia was younger. But now, I don't know. I like the quiet squig." He looked around the garden. "It's peaceful here." She smiled faintly. "It is. But sometimes peaceful can also mean lonely." He didn't know what to say. The sound of wind moving through leaves filled the space between them. Finally, she spoke again. "You remind me of him sometimes," she said. He looked up. "Who?" "Mia's father," she said, with a half smile. "Not how you look, but how you listen." He hesitated. "Was he a good man?" She nodded slowly. "He was kind, funny, but life. It changed us. After he passed, I stopped expecting much warmth in the house." And then she stopped herself, realizing she'd said too much. "And then?" he asked softly. She smiled, but it was the kind that hides something. "And then, I got used to the quiet again." The wind shifted. A few drops of rain began to fall, light and slow. She stood, brushing her hair from her face. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's go inside before it starts pouring." They walked back, side by side, their arms brushing once, twice. The faint smell of rain followed them in. Inside, the air felt warmer, heavier, carrying something that wasn't there before. Later that evening, he passed the living room doorway and saw her sitting alone, reading. The lamp cast a golden light over her shoulder, her hair glowing faintly in its warmth. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching quietly. She sensed it. She looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. It wasn't a long stare, but it held everything. Something unspoken, something that neither of them could name, but both already understood. And when she smiled faintly, almost shyly, before turning back to her book, he felt his heart beat a little too fast. That glance, just that, stayed with him long after he went to bed. The house was quiet again, but now even the silence had changed. The rain came softly that night, steady, rhythmic, and almost musical. It tapped against the windows and filled the quiet house with its own kind of heartbeat. The lights were low, the world outside blurred in silver streaks, and the scent of wet earth drifted through the half-open window. He sat in the living room, half watching an old movie, but his eyes weren't really on the screen. His thoughts kept drifting to her laughter earlier, to the way she had looked at him in the soft afternoon light, to that single glance that seemed to echo every time he blinked. Laura walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She was dressed in a long cardigan now, her hair falling loose over her shoulders. The sound of her footsteps was soft against the wooden floor, almost blending with the rain. "I made chamomile," she said gently. "It's good for rainy nights." He smiled, taking the mug. "You read my mind." "Maybe," she said, with a small, knowing grin. She sat down beside him, close but not too close. The couch dipped slightly beneath her weight. For a while, neither of them spoke. The movie sound filled the silent, soft dialogue. Faint music, but their focus wasn't there. The warmth of the tea between their hands, the dim glow of the lamp, the storm outside, it all wrapped them in something deeper than comfort. "I like this kind of rain," she said finally, her voice low. "It makes everything feel slower." He nodded. "Yeah, like the world takes a breath." She smiled faintly. "Exactly." There was a pause. The kind that stretched but didn't feel empty. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, surprised by the sudden question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "even when there are people around. It's not about being alone, I guess. It's something deeper." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the rain outside. "You're right. It's strange, isn't it? The house can be full, yet still feel empty." Her voice carried a soft ache, something unspoken behind it. He didn't know how to answer, so he didn't. He just sat there, listening to the rain with her. After a moment, she spoke again. "When Mia's father died, I thought the silence would break me. I'd go days without saying a word to anyone, just moving through rooms, hearing echoes." He looked at her. The glow of the lamp touched her face gently, tracing every line of tiredness and strength. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered faintly. "I had to be." The rain grew louder, filling the space between them. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, listening. The sound wrapped around them both like the world outside was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. He turned toward her slightly. "You miss him a lot, don't you?" She nodded. "Every day. But not in the way people expect. I don't miss the person anymore. I miss the feeling of being seen, of being part of something warm." He swallowed, his voice quiet. "You still have that warmth. You just don't always see it." Her eyes opened slowly, meeting his. "Maybe you're the only one who does." The words hung between them, soft, trembling, dangerous. Neither spoke after that. The rain filled the silence, the air thick with a kind of tension that felt alive. She looked at him, really, looked tanned for a second. The world outside disappeared. Then she looked away, setting her cup down gently. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you remind me what it's like to be noticed again." He said nothing. His heart was beating faster now, the sound of rain almost blending with it. "You shouldn't say things like that," he whispered. "I know." But she didn't sound sorry. And he didn't look away. The lights flickered slightly from the storm. The movie had ended long ago, leaving only soft background music. The air between them pulsed with something that wasn't just silence anymore, it was awareness. She laughed lightly. "Trying to break it?" "Listen to me," she said, shaking her head. "I sound like someone who's had too much wine." He smiled faintly. "You haven't had any." "Maybe that's worse," she said. They both laughed quietly. But the laughter didn't reach their eyes. After a while, she stood up, pulling the blanket from the couch and draping it over his shoulders. "You'll catch a cold sitting up like that," she said, her voice gentle again. He looked up at her, caught in the soft light. "And you?" "I'll be fine," she said. "I've weathered worse storms." He smiled. "I don't doubt that." She lingered for a moment longer, adjusting the blanket even though it didn't need fixing. Her hand brushed his shoulder, then his arm. It stayed there just long enough to feel his warmth through the fabric. Their eyes met once more, close. Quiet, full of everything neither dared to say. Then she stepped back, her breath trembling just slightly. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," he said. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft blue light of the storm outside. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, slow and steady. He sat there for a long time after she left, listening to the rain, replaying every word, every look, every silence, and somewhere in the sound of thunder, he realized that something had already changed between them, that couldn't be undone. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the world clean. But inside that house, something new had begun to bloom quietly in the dark. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world damp and shining. The sun returned slowly, glinting off wet leaves and puddles that mirrored the sky. Yet, inside the house, the air still carried the memory of the night before quiet. Heavy and full of something unnamed. He woke early, though he hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, her voice echoed softly in his mind. "You remind me what it's like to be noticed again." Those words had settled deep inside him, like a whisper that refused to fade. Downstairs, Laura was already awake. The smell of pancakes and warm butter filled the air. The radio played softly old songs, slow and mellow. She moved around the kitchen with her usual calm, humming under her breath. But when she saw him step in, her rhythm faltered for a heartbeat. "Morning," she said, smiling. But her voice was quieter than usual. "Morning," he replied. Taking a seat, the silence between them wasn't empty any. Morit was alive, breathing, waiting. "Sleep well?" she asked, pouring syrup on the pancakes. He shook his head with a small smile. "Not really." The rain was loud. She murmured. "I slept fine," but the faint color in her cheeks said otherwise. They ate quietly, pretending nothing had changed. Pretending they weren't thinking of the same moment replaying in both their minds. The clinking of cutlery filled the pauses they didn't know how to fill with words. When breakfast ended, she began washing dishes at the sink. He stood beside her, drying them. Their movements were in sync and spoken cooperation born out of familiarity. But today, even those small touches of play passed. A glass handed over felt different. Her fingers brushed his once, twice. The third time, neither of them moved away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't bold, just a small, trembling moment where time stopped. The sunlight spilled through the window, catching the faint shimmer of water on her hands. She looked up slowly. Their eyes met, and the world went still. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. The only sound was the soft trickle of water and the faint hum of the radio. He set the towel down, unable to look away. There was a question in his eyes unspoken, dangerous and tender. She didn't answer it with words. She didn't have to. When she finally stepped back, her breath trembled. "We shouldn't," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. He nodded slowly. "I know," but neither moved. Outside, a breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of rain-soaked grass. Inside, the quiet grew heavier, almost fragile. Then the phone rang, slicing through the silence like a sudden gust. Laura startled slightly, stepping away. "It's probably Mia," she said quickly, wiping her hands and reaching for it. Her voice changed as she spoke light. Normal, steady. "Hi, sweetheart." "Yes, I'm fine." "Oh no, don't worry. Everything's good here." He turned away, staring at the table, listening to the way she carefully steadied her tone. When she hung up, the calm returned, but something had cracked between them. The moment had been broken, but not erased. After lunch, she went out to the garden. He followed a few minutes later, pretending to check the fence. The afternoon sun was bright now, drying the wet ground. She was kneeling near the roses, trimming dead leaves, her hands gentle. "Patient, you don't have to help," she said softly, without looking up. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." For a long while, they worked in silence. The breeze carried the scent of flowers, fresh and sharp. A few bees buzzed lazily between petals. It should have been an ordinary day, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. When she finally looked up, strands of hair had fallen across her face. He reached out without thinking, brushing them back gently. She froze, then so did he. His fingers lingered near her cheek, close enough to feel her warmth. Her breath caught. The sound of the wind seemed to fade. He lowered his hand slowly, but she caught his wrist halfway. For one fragile second, they stayed like that, two people caught in the gravity of what shouldn't be. "Laura," he whispered. She closed her eyes briefly. "Don't," she said softly, her voice trembling. Please don't say my name like that. But he already had. And the sound hung in the air like a secret they could never take back. She let go of his hand, standing quickly. I should check dinner, she murmured. Turning toward the house, he watched her walk away. Sunlight following her as if even the day didn't want her to leave. That evening, neither spoke much. The dinner was quiet, the conversation polite, but hollow. The air between them had changed shape, no longer simple or easy. Every word was chosen carefully. Every glance avoided. When she finally stood up to clear the table, he reached for one of the plates at the same time. Their hands met again, and this time, she didn't pull away immediately. She looked at him, eyes wide with something like fear and something else entirely. This isn't right, she whispered. He nodded. I know. And yet, his hand stayed where it was. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that kitchen, surrounded by the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of night. Then, quietly, she stepped back, drawing in a slow breath. I'm going to bed, she said. Her voice was calm again, but her eyes weren't. Good night. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, it came out as barely more than a murmur. Good night. She turned off the lights as she left, and the house sank into soft darkness. He stood there in the dim glow of the window, staring at the space where she had just been. The line between them had blurred tonight, just slightly but enough to change everything, and somewhere deep inside, he knew they would cross it soon. Morning came quietly, almost as if the house itself was trying not to wake them too suddenly. The rain had gone, leaving the air cool and clean. Through the half-drawn curtains, sunlight spilled softly across the living room floor. Somewhere, far off, a bird was singing a slow, uncertain melody that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug of coffee in front of him. The steam curled upward, dissolving into the air, disappearing just as easily as the sleep he hadn't really had. The events of the night before kept replaying in his mind, not in sharp pictures, but in fragments, the way her hand had lingered on his wrist. The sound of her voice trembling when she said, "Don't say my name like that." He wasn't sure what line they had crossed, only that something delicate had been broken. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Laura appeared in the doorway, her hair tied up, dressed in soft beige morning clothes. She looked calm, collected, but her eyes told a different story. "Morning," she said, her voice even. "Morning," he replied. Trying to sound the same, she poured herself coffee. The faint clink of the spoon, stirring sugar, cutting through the silence. It was an ordinary morning sound, but it felt heavier now. Every movement she made was careful, almost rehearsed. "How'd you sleep?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly, not meeting his gaze. "Well enough then." After a pause. "You?" He shrugged. "Oh, didn't really." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew. "Yeah, me neither." For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. The steady rhythm seemed too loud, to present, counting every second they weren't saying what they both felt. Finally, she broke the silence. "I think I'll go into town today," she said. "There are a few errands I've been putting off. Want me to come with you?" "No," she said quickly, then softened her tone. "I mean, it's fine. You've already helped enough." He hesitated. "You don't have to do this pretend. Nothing's different." Her eyes lifted to his, the calm finally cracking for a moment. "I'm not pretending," she said softly. "I'm trying to remember what normal feels like." The words hit harder than he expected. He nodded, unable to find an answer. After she left, the house felt emptier than usual. The distant hum of traffic outside, the ticking clock. Even the creak of floorboards, it all sounded louder without her presence. He wandered through the rooms aimlessly, his fingers brushing. The walls, the furniture, the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the hallway. By afternoon, the light shifted to gold. He found himself standing at the back door, looking at the garden where they'd worked side by side the day before. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, the same ones she had trimmed. He could still picture her kneeling there, hair falling loose, sunlight catching her skin. He didn't hear her return until the door clicked softly behind him. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet but warm again. He turned, startled. "Hey, I didn't hear you come in." "I didn't want to wake the house," she said with a small smile. Old habit. She set a paper bag on the counter, fresh bread, fruit, a bottle of milk. "Picked up a few things," she said. "Thought I'd make something for dinner later. Can I help?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." They worked side by side again, chopping vegetables, washing lettuce, slicing bread. It should have felt normal, it almost did, but the air still held that faint pulse of something unspoken. Every now and then, their hands brushed. Every now and then, their eyes met for just a second, too long. At one point, she dropped the knife, slightly startled by his hand reaching for the same cutting board. He caught it before it hit the counter, their fingers tangling for a heartbeat. They froze, her breath caught, and she pulled her hand away slowly. "You shouldn't," she began, but couldn't finish. "I know," he said softly. Dinner passed quietly. The food was good, but neither tasted much of it. They talked about small things, the weather, a show on TV, Mia's trip, but each word felt like it was trying to cover something deeper. When they finished, she stood up first. "I'll clean up," she said. He shook his head. "Let me help." "You've helped enough," she said again. But her voice trembled slightly this time. He took a step closer, the words rising before he could stop them. "Laura, we can't just keep pretending. Something's happening between us." She turned toward him, eyes glistening with something between fear and longing. "Don't say that," she whispered, "but it's true." "Maybe," she said, "but some truths hurt more when spoken aloud." The silence that followed was sharp, like the air before a storm. She looked at him for a long time, her chest rising and falling slowly. Then she sighed, shaking her head. "You should go get some rest. I'll finish here." He wanted to argue, but her expression stopped him. He nodded, stepping back as he turned to leave. She spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You're not the only one losing sleep over this." He froze in the doorway, wanting to say something, but no words came. That night, he lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but every sound, the creak of the wood, the faint hum of the fridge, the whisper of wind through the window felt like her presence nearby. He wondered if she was awake too, in another room, under the same roof. She was. Sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the window where the moonlight touched the curtains. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered to herself, "What have we done?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. And somewhere between the rooms, in the stillness of that house, the unspoken line they had tried to erase began to draw itself again, fainter, but still there. For now. The house had settled back into its calm rhythm by the time Mia's message arrived. "Landing tonight. Can't wait to see you both." Laura read the text twice before setting her phone down. The words were cheerful, simple, but they felt heavier now. It wasn't just Mia who was coming home. It was the world returning to what it had been before everything changed. Outside, the evening light was fading into soft amber. The air smelled of rain again, distant but near enough to promise another quiet storm. Inside, the house looked perfect, fresh flowers on the table, clean floors, every trace of tension neatly hidden away. He was in the living room, arranging cushions, pretending not to feel the same nervous weight. Their conversations had been polite for the past few days, short, careful, practiced. Every smile between them was measured. Every silence stretched too long. "She'll be here around 8, Laura said, standing at the doorway. He nodded. "I'll go pick her up." "No," she said quickly, then softened. "I think I should go. It's been a few days. She'll want to see me first." He hesitated, then nodded again. "Right, of course." The moment lingered. Her eyes held his for just a second till long then she looked away, smoothing her hair. "There's dinner in the oven," she murmured. "She'll be hungry." He almost said something, then something honest. Something that had been sitting on his tongue since that night, but he stopped himself. The sound of her keys clinking broke the thought. "I'll see you soon," she said. "Drive safe," he replied. And just like that, she was gone. The sound of the front door closing felt final somehow. It's like a curtain drawing shut after the last act of a play. He stood there for a while, staring at the empty hallway. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock filled the silence. He poured himself a glass of water, then put it down untouched. When he finally sat on the couch, he noticed something small, her book left open on the coffee table. The same one she'd been reading the night of the rain. He picked it up, tracing his fingers over the page. Her handwriting was in the margins. Some silences are heavier than words. He smiled faintly. "You can say that again," he murmured to himself. Hours passed slowly. The sound of cars outside faded as the night deepened. When headlights finally flashed through the window, he stood up quickly, heart tightening. The door opened, and there was Mia Bright, happy, pulling her mother into a hug. "Mom, I missed you." Laura laughed softly, hugging her daughter tightly. "I missed you too, sweetheart." Her laughter sounded real again, but he could hear the slight catch in it, the controlled warmth of someone hiding too much. Mia turned toward him, smiling wide. "Hey, you survived Mom's cooking. I see." He chuckled. "Barely." They laughed, and for a brief moment, the tension cracked just enough to breathe. But beneath the surface, it was still there, unspoken, invisible, coiled tight like a shadow. Dinner was lively. Mia talked non-stop about her trip, the meetings, the people she met. Laura listened with practiced joy, nodding, smiling, laughing in all the right places. He joined in, pretending to, matching their rhythm. But every so often, their eyes met across the table, just for a heartbeat. Just long enough to remember everything that had passed in the quiet days before. When dinner ended, Mia stood to grab dessert. "I brought chocolates," she said excitedly. Rummaging through her bag, Laura leaned back slightly, letting out a small breath of relief. He noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted her glass. Their eyes met again briefly. Almost by accident, something passed between them. Not desire this time, not guilt. Just a shared understanding, this has to stay buried. Later that night, when Mia went to bed, the house grew quiet again. Only the soft hum of the night filled the air. He was washing the last of the dishes when Laura came back into the kitchen. Arms folded lightly. "She's happy," he said, drawing a plate. "Yes," Laura replied. "She doesn't need to know anything else." He nodded. "Of course not." She hesitated at the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You've been good to her," she said quietly. "And to me," he looked at her. "You don't have to thank me." "I do," she said. "Because after everything, I don't know what I would have done without you here." The words carried warmth, but also distance. She was building a wall with kindness, and he could feel it. "I should go," he said after a moment. "It's getting late." She nodded. "Good night." He dried his hands, turned off the light, and walked past her. As he did, her perfume brushed the air between them, a familiar scent, soft and haunting. She didn't move, didn't speak. But her breath trembled slightly as he passed. When his footsteps faded up the stairs, Laura leaned against the counter, her hand pressing lightly against her chest, in her reflection on the dark kitchen window. She saw herself not as she was, but as she had been those quiet days before her daughter returned. There was a small, bitter smile on her lips as she whispered, back to normal. But she didn't believe it. Upstairs, he lay awake once more, staring at the ceiling. The sound of rain had started again outside, faint but familiar. It carried memories, the quiet talks, the stolen glances, the warmth that had almost burned too bright. He knew it was over. He knew it had to be. Yet, as the rain grew steadier, one thought refused to leave him. Some connections don't end. They just go quiet, waiting. And somewhere in the house below, Laura lay awake too, listening to the same rain, breathing the same air, feeling the same ache she could never admit aloud. The days after Mia's return passed like slow-moving clouds, steady on the outside, but heavy underneath. The house was lively again. Music in the mornings, laughter echoing down the hallway, fresh flowers by the window. But beneath the surface, something fragile trembled in invisible current. Running between two people who couldn't forget, he tried to act as if everything was normal. He helped Mia with her laptop troubles, made breakfast, fixed a leaky tap. But every time he caught Laura's gaze across the room, the air shifted. It wasn't what it used to be. No longer fire, no longer tension. It was quieter now, sadder, like the echo of a song that once meant everything. One evening, after dinner, Mia announced she was meeting a friend from work. She kissed her mother's cheek, waved to him, and was gone before the front door even closed completely. Silence settled again, thick. Uncomfortable, familiar, Laura was at the sink, washing dishes slowly. The faint sound of running water filled the space. He stood near the table, pretending to check messages that weren't there. Finally, he spoke. "You've been quiet lately." She didn't look up. "There's been a lot on my mind, I can tell." A pause. Then she turned off the water, drying her hands on a towel. "Don't do that," she said softly. "Do what?" "Try to open doors that need to stay shut." He looked at her carefully. "You mean pretend nothing happened?" Her shoulders stiffened. Something did happen. That's the problem. He took a step closer. "Then let's not pretend anymore." She turned, eyes meeting his for the first time in days. There was a storm, their guilt, longing, exhaustion. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. An apology. A confession. He shook his head. "No, I just need to understand." She exhaled, her breath trembling. "There's nothing to understand." We were lonely. It was a moment we shouldn't have allowed. And now she stopped, her voice breaking. Now it's something we both have to live with. He stepped closer, his voice quiet. "It wasn't just loneliness, Laura. Don't," she said quickly. "Please don't say my name like that again." Her tone was sharp, but her eyes softened instantly. The name carried too much, too many nights, too many silences. He swallowed. "You can keep pretending, but I can't. Every time I see you, I feel like I'm walking around with a secret I never asked for." "You think I don't feel it too?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "I see you every day and have to remind myself to breathe normally." The room fell quiet. Outside, the wind had started again, brushing against the windows. The sound of it filled the pauses they couldn't. She sat down at the table, her hands clasped tightly. "I've thought about that night 1,000 times, she said. "Every time I wish I could erase it. And every time I realize I can't." He sat opposite her, his voice low. "Do you regret it?" She hesitated, eyes glistening. "I regret what it cost. But not what it meant," he said softly. Her gaze lifted to his, steady this time. "No," she admitted. "Not what it meant." The words hung between them, soft, painful, real. He leaned forward slightly. "Then maybe we just stop running from it." She shook her head. "It's not that simple. Mia trusts you. She trusts me." "What do we tell her?" "That her mother and her boyfriend," her voice cracked. She couldn't finish. He closed his eyes, the guilt slicing through him. "You're right," he whispered. "We can't tell her. She'd never look at either of us the same." "I know." The quiet that followed was thick enough to drown in. The sound of the clock ticking felt cruel now, counting seconds they could never get back. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice smaller now. "Do you ever wish we'd met under different circumstances?" He looked up. "Every day." She smiled sadly. "Maybe then I wouldn't have felt so seen again." He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. For a moment, she didn't move. Their fingers met slowly, gently, like two memories finding each other again. She didn't pull away. "I can't hate you for what happened," she whispered, "even if I should. And I can't forget you," he said quietly, "even if I try." Tears gathered in her eyes. She laughed softly through them. "You're young. You'll forget. People always do." He shook his head. "Not this time." The wind outside picked up, rattling the window slightly. She stood, taking a slow breath, composing herself. "Mia will be home soon," she said. He stood too, interrupting softly. "I just needed to hear the truth once." "From you?" Her voice trembled. "You already knew the truth," he nodded. "But now it hurts less." She stepped closer, her face only inches from his. "Then let this be the last time it hurts," she whispered. "Whatever this was, it ends here." He nodded, but neither of them moved. Their eyes stayed locked, suspended in that fragile moment. Then, as if sensing it was too much, Laura stepped back. "Good night," she said quietly. He nodded again. Unable to speak, she turned, her footsteps soft against the floor. Fading down the hallway, he stood there long after she was gone, staring at the empty chair where she had sat. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a quiet ghost of something beautiful and wrong. Outside, the wind died down. The house was still again. But inside him, something shifted. The truth was out now, not clean, not simple, but honest. And for the first time in days, he felt the weight begin to lift slowly, painfully, like the last echo of a secret finally allowed to breathe. Morning light crept slowly through the curtains, golden and quiet. The house was still half asleep, only the hum of the fridge, the distant chirp of birds, and the faint creak of old wood filled the air. It was the kind of morning that felt like a held breath, gentle yet waiting for something to end. He stood by the window, watching the driveway. The sky was a soft gray, the kind that promised calm but carried the weight of a storm long past. A small bag rested near the doordash. His Laura entered the room moments later, her footsteps light, hesitant. She wore a pale sweater, hair tied back loosely, eyes tired from another sleepless night. The look on her face said everything she hadn't spoken yet. "You're leaving early," she said softly. He nodded. "The train's at 10. A pause. "You could have stayed another day." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I shouldn't." The silence that followed was heavy, but not cruel. It was the silence of two people who had already said everything that mattered. Still, neither wanted to move. She walked to the kitchen counter, pouring water into the kettle. The faint click of metal, the soft gurgle of boiling water, it was a rhythm they both knew too well. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. One last time. The smell filled the air, warm, familiar. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. Just a small touch. Yet even that felt like goodbye. He took a sip, staring down at the dark surface of the drink. "Mia's still asleep." "Yes," Laura said. She was up late talking to her friends. She smiled faintly. "It's good to see her laugh again." He nodded, setting the cup down carefully. "She's happy. That's what matters." They stood there, side by side, staring at the same spot on the wall as if afraid to look at each other. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't think it would be this hard." He turned to her. "Saying goodbye." She nodded. "Letting you go." He exhaled slowly, his throat tightening. "I didn't think it would be either." For a moment, her composure slipped. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "You should hate me for what I let happen. For what I made harder than it ever should have been." "I don't," he said softly. "I could never hate you." Her eyes shimmered. "Then promise me something, anything." "Forget the ache," she said. "But remember the warmth. We both needed something that night. Maybe it wasn't right, but it was real." He smiled sadly. "I'll remember that." The kettle clicked off, a small sound in the vast quiet. She turned to pour the rest of the water away, hiding her face for a moment. When she turned back, her eyes were dry but softer now. "Mia's been talking about the future," she said quietly. "About you? About how lucky she feels." He swallowed, guilt pressing deep. "She deserves everything good." "She does," Laura agreed. "So do you." Their eyes met steady, calm, and full of all the words they couldn't speak aloud. "I'll take a walk before the cab comes," he said finally, needing the distance to steady himself. She nodded. "The garden's still wet. Watch your step." He smiled gently at the familiar concern. "You always say that. Old habits," she whispered. He picked up his bag and paused at the doorway. "Take care of yourself, Laura." Her lips trembled at the sound of her name. "You too," she said softly. And then he was gone. Outside, the morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of dew and earth. The garden shimmered under the early sun. He walked along the narrow path where they had once worked side by side, the roses now in full bloom. The same breeze that had tangled her hair that day brushed against his skin now, softer somehow, almost like a memory saying farewell. He stopped near the gate, glancing back at the house. Through the kitchen window, he saw her silhouette still standing where he'd left her, holding her cup of coffee, unmoving. For a moment, he thought she might turn, might wave, might come outside. But she didn't. She just stayed there, quiet, small, brave. He whispered to himself, "Some goodbyes don't need words." Then he turned and kept walking. Inside, Laura stood still for a long time. The coffee in her hands had gone cold. Her eyes followed the faint reflection of him fading from the window's edge. She wanted to cry, but didn't. She had done enough of that already. Instead, she walked to the table, where his half-empty cup still sat. She touched the rim lightly, tracing the warmth that was already fading. Then, slowly, she sat down, closing her eyes as the kettle ticked softly in the background. Upstairs, Mia stirred in her room, unaware of anything. The world outside went on like nothing had changed. But for Laura, something had something deep and quiet. Something she would carry like a folded letter never sent. As the hours passed, the house filled again with ordinary sounds, the clink of dishes, the rustle of curtains, the chirp of the radio. Life resumed its rhythm, but every now and then, when the wind brushed against the window or the scent of coffee drifted through the air, she would pause just for a moment to remember not the mistake, not the guilt, just the warmth, and in some faraway town. As the train rolled forward and the landscape blurred into streaks of green and gold, he sat by the window, watching the world move. His reflection stared back at him, quiet, thoughtful. He smiled faintly, whispering to no one, "She'd be okay." Outside, sunlight spilled across the fields. The train kept going, and with every mile, the ache began to fade, but not the memory. That stayed. Soft, bittersweet, eternal when the story finally ended. It didn't close with tears or chaos. But with the quiet sounds, it began with the hum of a home, the ticking of a clock, and the soft pouring of coffee in the morning light. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace.